I'm just going to share for a little bit about something that's been really stirring in me for a while. And I don't know if all the words will come out the way they should come out, but I think if your hearts are open, you'll receive. For some of you, this may be going, yes, yes, I know this to be true, and I want to continue in this journey. For others, it could be this whole pandemic season has created a sense of I'm just tired. I am ready to be done this, kind of thing, and can't wait. And so, God has something for us in that. And then there's a whole bunch of people around us that live around us and maybe within us in our worlds that are just exhausted. And I think of some of the frontline workers that we know of, and it sounds as strange as it is, some politicians for sure, definitely some other people, and even just a weekend away or a week's holiday or flying to a nice place and coming back won't be enough to kind of change this deep heaviness, that's sifted into certain people. And so, and for a lot of them, for a lot of us, we've had to go through this and experiencing things that this has brought things to the surface in our hearts. For those who know our situation in the past, in 2019 was when our daughter was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma, and that took us into the pandemic, into stages of that, where to me the pandemic didn't even matter to me in a lot of ways. So the things we had to do, we got to do along and walking beside her, if you will. The even a common cold in the restage part of her therapy could take her out. And so a lot of the processes, it was really, really personal in our world. And then when that started to lift at that stage, all of a sudden I got aware of some of the bigger things that were going on. And I've had the fortunate privilege to talk with different people around the world, those that are been leading, if you will, and serving communities in different countries and different places, and just listening to the common themes that have been going on. And one of the ones on a more positive side, something that someone shared a few weeks ago, is that God doesn't typically point out the negatives. He always describes and tells us about the positives. So he'll keep reminding you, for example, personally, who you are to him. It just takes a glance to read through Song of Solomon or some of the Psalms, and you'll get this sense of even David's laments, but how it comes back to this reality of how much God loves. And I find it interesting, when I heard that statement a couple of weeks ago, it just dawned on me how many negative things I've spoken over myself, or I've thought about other people or other situations in the world. And he's reminding me, that this pandemic, this season is, I'm going to use it for the good. And the good will be, I am doing something new if you can see it. And I know they're trite verses for some people, but they really get really quite deep for me now, especially the last year, when it talks about in Romans 5, count it all joy. Count it all joy when you experience trials and tribulations, because it's producing something, it's developing something, it's creating something. Well, who's doing the developing, the creating, the doing? It's him in us, but we're going to participate in a different perspective than just letting the circumstances, impress and push us down. And so along that line, this is where I wanted to share a little bit about, I personally, I don't know about you, but I love helicopter views. I love seeing the big picture. I've always known in the old Strength Finders, mine is my number one way I'm wired is strategic. I love to be able to see the big picture. The good side about that is it gives me lots of neat perspectives and things. The bad side about it is if I don't see it, I get frustrated, because then it's hard for me to know why I'm doing what I'm doing. I like to know the whys and the bigger pictures. For those who know, when I came into the ministerial, when I got led, if you will, I used to call it dragged in, when I got led into the ministry out of the corporate world, I was operating there in a lot of strategic things. And so when I came in, it didn't make any sense to me why God was pulling me back into ministry world after 13 years of being in the corporate world, because what I could see was nothing was working. Like what I thought were the measurements of those days, and the measurements I thought or just simply how many people are coming to experience what we all on the screen have, is it coming to an awareness of the reality that God is real and he loves us, i.e. how many people were coming to faith. And for those who know the stats, in North America, Christianity hasn't grown since the Second World War. In Canada, back 50, 60 years ago, it was like, I can't remember, 40 to 50% of all Canadians were attending a local community on a consistent basis. And then within 2 decades, it dropped down to like 10% or something. It was quite phenomenal. And I remember thinking in my mind, this was my thinking, is that, well, if you're drawing me into this thing, why would you draw me into something that's not working? I was looking for a way out. And one of it was, I don't want to attach myself to something that's, that's failing, if you will. And if Christianity hasn't grown in North America, what the heck? And I've been out of it for 13 years in terms of the way I thought leaderships acted. Volumetrically, it has grown, but so is population and immigration. Per capita, nothing's changed, up by 1%, down by 1%. And so I just couldn't quite figure out what the heck, what are you trying to draw in? And I remember coming to my own conclusions that, well, it can't be the gospel. When you look at places like China, the explosion of the gospel there, or Iran, the one university in Iran, 90% of the students came to faith over a period of years. The biggest church in the world, I thought, was in Korea, 1 million people. Turns out, no, it's in Nigeria. It's huge, 6 football fields under one roof. Like, God is doing things in terms of the way I was measuring in those days, external things. But how come not here? How come not necessarily in Europe or North America? Although we seem to have tons of conversations and tons of churches. There was other things that bothered me at the time that I didn't understand at the time. Now I completely see it differently. But there was a lot of volumetric growth, and yet the generation that was coming along found it hard to participate in the types of churches that were growing in a certain way, because it seemed as though we're doing a lot of inward but not outward. Now, recently, there's a church that I know of in California. I won't say its name. It's a well-known church. It's had the leader of that church has a team that they started with 25 people, and it's been 40 some years, and they didn't meet this whole entire pandemic in person. They took a very conservative approach, and yet 16,000 people come to faith without hearing any messages, there was no offerings taken, there was no worship going on. And when he was on a phone call, the leader with a number of Christian leaders around the world sharing, he says, now, what happened to us, he said, we've been for 40 years learning how to not figure out how to get people to come to church. We were learning how to not to have the community come to the church, but how to get the church, the people of God, into the community. And this pandemic for them in that part of California was a beautiful picture of, well, we now have no choice in a sense. We do have a choice, but this is an opportunity, and go love your neighbors. And so they became the largest distributor of food to the needy, even beyond the government and the other charities that are in that part of California. The stories are quite unique around the world, and they're starting to come in. And some people go, well, how come that didn't happen in our city or our town or our church? And he makes a very clear case. He said, this was 40 years in the making. There was a preparation going on in our hearts to know what love looks like, especially in times when people are going through tough stuff. And so he just made it very clear, do not try and replicate this. Do not try and, they did this, so we do that. Everybody's unique. Everybody is at different stages of how they're processing through this. That led me to a conversation last week, and this is the gist of where I'm going to share a little bit, is this: everybody thinks about, well, what's going to be the new? We know that God is up to something. And one thing we know about God, when he's up to bring change, he does it very lovingly, very carefully, very patiently, and he prepares people. He's chosen to always work through people to interact with the planet and with people, other people. And so what is this change looking like? What is this? And the spiritual leaders that I've talked to across the nation, and some in America and a few other places, there tends to be a common conversation. One is that the ones that are very honest are quite taken by how immature some of the people around them have been going through. Not immature in a bad way, but just the sense of they went inward versus coming outward. And they had thought, after being a member of a church for 20 years, that they could be different. And we talked about that. And then in a more practical level, someone said, well, we know the old wineskin is dissipating. The things, for those who have not had a chance to read the Bob Mumford document, it'll be on the website this coming week, but it's a 90-year-old man that's been around for a long time in the body of Christ. And he helps describe what goes on every 500 years in the world, in the human culture, of a shift that goes on. It takes many years for it to go on, but we're right in the middle of that. And one of the things that shifts is perspectives and how we view authority and what is the authority of the day. And meanwhile, in the midst of that, God is getting people ready for the shift. Think back to the children of Egypt, captured, and God's going to lead them out. He prepares them. When they get to the desert, he shows them the promised land. He starts to prepare them, and that preparation took 40 years to get ready to step into the new. Jesus shows up, and that was a 400-year silence going on in culture around the Jewish people. And they're looking, some of them are studying the scriptures so diligently, but they missed him. And he shows up, and here's what God does. His first act, if you will, the miracle is interesting, it has to do with wine. And we're going to talk about wine and wineskins. But the first thing after the Father leads Jesus to select these 12 dudes, these fishermen, these tax collectors, and their hearts are going to start being prepared to receive something brand new. They can't perceive it. They can't understand it. But they're about ready to receive this. All through history, every 500 years, you'll see this massive shift. It's happening all the time in people's hearts, individually. But what we begin to see, there's these massive moves, that seems to incorporate a lot of people. 500 years ago, that's a long time ago for some of us, but it's in history, it's a blip. And God, at that point, the body had become old wine. It become very dry, very bitter. There was the authority of the day was overlords. We had 3 corrupt popes at that time in history. We had kings and leaders that were suppressing people that did not know the Bible. And in a few hearts, there's a list of these men, but the one is that comes to the service, and women, but one specifically that became well known is Martin Luther, who finally stood up, and out of him came, there was something fresh. It's by justification is by faith, and faith alone. And he starts printing 5,000 New Testaments every week. And the word, the Logos word of God, starts to go out amongst people. And all of a sudden, it takes about 100 years. It's a very messy time in church history, but it goes into the culture against even what was happening there, and begins a shift and a change. This new wine gets poured out into open hearts, and then it starts to have an effect around it. And so the question then becomes, well, what's going on now? And some of the people in our culture and in our country are all asking pretty much the same question. Well, what's the new wineskin going to look like? We kind of know there's something going on. We know God is releasing something of himself that has never been released before. Whenever the world goes into a massive storm, whatever it is, if your heart's open to it, you can receive there's something else going on in him. And the question is, well, what is the new going to look like structurally? How will the church gather? What will it be like? And the conversation is, interesting enough, and the people I've talked to, we've come to the same, revelation that it's not really about the wineskins, i.e., in a structural sense. It's about the wine. And if the wine is flowing as it did, let's go back to the disciples, as this new revelatory way of living starts to be released into these disciples, they're getting challenged. The Pharisees couldn't handle it. They had the old wine, and that's fine. This is how we do it. But these new hearts were receiving new wine, but they had no clue what it was going to look like. We know in Acts chapter 1, they still ask him after his resurrection, when will this new kingdom come? The thing you talked about more than anything else, Jesus, was the kingdom of God. And so we want to know, so now that you're resurrected and our hope is back and there is life, when will it come? And if you read that in Acts, he says, this is not for man to know. This is in the Father's hands. The Father knows the times. And he said their hearts are still fixated on wanting to know what's next and when it will happen. Because now they're excited. Something's been happening to them. They've seen this resurrection, everything that he revealed. He had lived so differently. Think of the lifestyle that Jesus represented in that time. You know, how did that go with the Pharisees and the people watching, how he lived, how he forgave sin, how he loved. The compassion that came out of him was beyond anything. The disciples, not knowing quite knew who he was, would say things that are recorded. You know, you have the words of life. When you speak, life comes. This positivity, this sense of hope, it goes into us. And so this kingdom, I guess, and we're going to be a part of it. You told us that before we die, some of us will actually see it. You said it's around us and it will be in us. Like, they're listening to all this description of what we'll call it wine. You go back to the first miracle, and Jesus takes those 6 water pots after his mother encourages him to do that. And 6 is a number of man's achievements, if you will. 7 is God's number. And 6 water pots, these were ceremonial pots that you would wash your hands for cleaning before you stepped in. It was kind of the thing you did as Pharisees and such. And he turns it into not just any old wine, it's incredibly good wine. And I won't give it all away. This is for a whole other conversation. But every act that Jesus did wasn't just some spontaneous kind of, I just feel like doing it. It is revealing the nature of God, of Yahweh. There's so much in that story. Why the 6 pots? The response to his mother. Why the good wine? It was interesting that it was the number 3. It was the 3rd day of the feast. And the old wine, the first wine, was now running out. And this is really important for us to understand when it comes to understanding new wine and wineskins. You don't put new wine, you don't mix new wine with old wine. You don't put new wine in, it goes into an empty wineskin, but you don't put it in an old wineskin. In 3 places in the gospel, Jesus talks about wine and wineskins, or as he's recorded of talking about it. Probably talked about it at least once time, and 3 of them recorded it. The only book that doesn't record it is John, but Matthew, Mark, and Luke each have the same language. Luke adds an extra line to the story, which is quite profound, which we'll get to, but he has been, the reason he brings up the context, if we were standing with him in that moment, John the Baptist has sent his disciples over to see if Jesus is the Messiah. And they're having this conversation. They're listening to Jesus describe this new life, describe what this is like. And all they know, even the disciples of Jesus, they were all raised in the law. They were all raised in a way that this is the paradigms. This is how it works. This is how you follow God. This is how you react to him. Love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and body, et cetera, et cetera. And the disciples are now noticing something different with Jesus. And our disciples fast. How come yours aren't? And Jesus explains that. And then he unpacks it like so many of the things he does. He shares a metaphor. He shares a story to get to their hearts. And we'll just read here, Luke 5:38, and so then he spoke a parable to them. No one puts a piece from a new garment on an old one. Otherwise, the new makes a tear, and also that piece was taken out of the new does not match the old. No one puts new wine into old wineskins, or else the new wine will burst. The wineskins can be spilled, and the wineskins will be ruined. The wine will be spilled, and the wineskins will be ruined. But new wine must be put into new wineskins, and both are preserved. And then this is a line that's in Luke that's not in Matthew and Mark, but it says, no one who drinks the old wine seems to want the new. The old is fine, they say. What's interesting is lots of things are going on in this little parable about how life flows, how wine flows. Think of the Last Supper with Jesus holding up that cup of wine. There's so many things about wine you could spend a book on describing what it meant to the people of that day, and what the metaphor, this is the blood for the new covenant. And he did that with them after 3 years of them being exposed, if you will, to watching how this wine was coming out of Jesus. And he says, this new wine, John, he's telling them the old ways can't contain the new. You can't put a new piece of cloth on an old, because it'll tear and it'll destroy it. And God's grace is he will not pour new wine into old wineskins. The question for many people, and you've heard me talk about this before, I'm sure, the question is not, what's the wineskin? What's the structure? Is he going to pour his wine into a Sunday structure, or into a version of Christianity? Pick a denomination, pick a group. And will he pour it into the one group that is ready to run with the new thing? And he won't pour it into an old group. Is that what's going on here? Is that what he's saying? For a long time, that's what I thought that meant, because people would talk about the wineskins as structures or belief systems, and they're getting closer with that. It really is old thinking. It really is the way we perceive things. And you can be part of a group that perceives things and be influenced that. But at the end of the day, it comes down to us personally, uniquely. What is the wineskin to us? Is it our attachment to a group of people, or to a movement, or to hey, I'm a charismatic now, or I am this, or I'm that. A good friend of mine who's a black man, he's a comedian, and he says, I've always known myself as black, and then one day I woke up and they called me African American. He goes, I don't know when it happened, but somehow I changed from being black to an African American. And people who they talk about this all the time, about the shifts that the body of Christ goes through. And now we're this, and now we're this. I remember talking to John Hutch one day, and I said, John, how would you describe U Church? And he said, I describe it as conservative charismatic. And I said, what the heck does that mean? And how do you take those two words and put them together? And we sat there and talked about our hearts. The wineskin, and it's important to just know exactly the words that were used there, but in Luke 5:38, the word for new wine is the word neos, which just means fresh, not been before, was not there before, has not, is only recently revealed. All these words that go on with that word has been used in the Hebrew language and the Greek. This is a word that would describe it's not been seen before. Well, hang on. What we're stepping into, what God's up to right now in the world, has happened before. It happened at Pentecost. It happened at the resurrection. It happened in those first 300 years of Christianity. And then it became old. What became old? Certainly not the wine, the wineskin. And because individually, as we're being poured out, you can't pour. It's when the old wine is depleted. How do you know in your heart when the things that gave you life at some point are now not? Is you'll feel dry. You'll feel, where's the joy? You'll feel the sense of, oh, I don't want to be a part of that anymore. It's hard to participate in things. And is it really the thing, or is there something in us that's going on that we're getting prepared for something. Our wineskin, our heart, is the best way to describe a wineskin. The very nature of who you are is getting rigid. It's getting old. It's poured out everything that's poured. It's not a negative thing. God prunes even the good. He helps us come to what Paul told the Romans in chapter 12. Don't be conformed. Let me just read it from the one version. It says, "Beloved friends, we should be our proper response to what should be our proper response to God's marvelous mercies that never end? They're new every morning. I encourage you to surrender yourselves to God to be his sacred living sacrifices and live in holiness. Experience all that delights his heart. Experiencing all that delights his heart. For this becomes your genuine expression of worship." Isn't that interesting? The most genuine expression of worship is experiencing all the delights that delights his heart. Stop imitating the ideals and opinions of the culture around you, but be inwardly transformed by the Spirit through a total reformation of how you think. This will empower you to discern God's will as you live a beautiful life, satisfied and perfect in his eyes. There's so much in that. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. How do you renew your mind? That word renew is the same word. That word new is where new wine goes into a new wineskin. The new wineskin is a word that means renewed. And you've heard this before, but it's the dimension of that word is there's innovation, it's new development, new opportunity. The best thing about what Jesus says and recorded is that new wineskins, old wineskins, our hearts, those around us, those in our world, they can be renewed. That's the point he's making here. He puts new wine in renewed wineskins. It can be repurposed through innovation. And the part that I find is interesting, when you've drank in the old, and maybe you've been a Christian 5 years, 5 minutes. I know for me, when I was a new Christian, I'd never been to a church. A year and a half later, I just got everything from him, playing my guitar and spending time with him. And granted, it was pretty limited. But it wasn't until I stepped into a community that two things began to happen. One was I realized I wasn't on my own trying to figure things out. Don't lean on my own understanding. The mouth of many counselors would be helpful. Learning how to love required me learning how to get past offenses. How many know the closer you get to people, the more you get hurt? You can get wounded by people. I find it fascinating. I was telling my wife this the other day that the very first message I remember hearing from my first shepherd leader in my life said, you know why God encourages you to come together. He wasn't talking about attending a religious old wineskin, if you will, thinking for the purpose of just that. But when you come together, there's life is released, it's flowing in you, et cetera, et cetera. But guess what? There's something else that's going to happen. It's going to reveal the stuff in you that has that's old wine, like how we think about other people. In other words, you're going to get offended. You're going to get ticked off. You're not going to like how they say it or how they do it or whichever. It's the history of Christianity for the last 1,000 years. It seems like tons of living from what's the tree of the knowledge of good and the knowledge of evil. And the more knowledge we gain and get, the more we get pretty convicted or convinced that is how it should be. And we get stuck in ways of thinking. God knows this about us. And that's why all of a sudden it seems to come to its end. It doesn't, where's the joy? Where's the love? How come we're not seeing it come out of us if we know it so well? Well, because there's something else going on in us. When we get close to people, we get offended. What's getting offended? Ourself, the thing inside of us that believes in certain ways and should be this way. And how do you deal with offense? Well, the new wine, Peter went to Jesus and said, okay, our hearts are getting prepared kind of thing. How many times are we supposed to forgive? Let's just get right to the point. Is it 3 times? How about 7? How about 7? That's a good one. It's a perfect number. It's double what the Jews were told to do, and add one. Maybe that was his. And Jesus responds with this new wine that he's living in. It's always. Always. How in the heck do you do that? I don't have enough patience to continually forgive that person who keeps hurting me, or that whatever. This is such a wide gap. Well, you need to be transformed, renewed for this new wine to come, because it can't fit into a mentality that says, well, this is how much I'll put up with. This is what I'll do. This is incredibly important to see, that you can see through history. We get the beautiful hindsight to go back and watch through history. Every time God began moving in a way when it was, he doesn't move. This is an interesting statement, but God doesn't move in the world because we ask him to. He moves in the world because he wants to, and we get to join him. And he typically is moving when it's getting harder and worse. And he starts to pour out this new wine into hearts that are ready to receive and hungry and thirsting for that. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for right alignment, right connection, righteousness, which is what that means, for they will be filled. And this is what it talks about, is our desire to be getting that place. So I'm going to get close to the end here and just say, I really believe what God is doing right now is preparing people to receive wine. We can't see what the new is. If I can imagine being a disciple and listening to Jesus talk, and I remember when I was young, I remember relating to Judas. Later on, I thought, that sounded pretty bad. But at first I thought, he's been hanging out with him for 3.5 years. He's an accountant. He knows how things operate. He knows power in his world is related to the powers to be. And they're in a one world government it's been going now, and it goes for 500 years. And the oppression, the slavery that the people of God are now in, it doesn't make sense. It's not fair. We're supposed to be everything those Psalms tell us to be, and all these promises. And I can imagine Judas, who knows the law and he knows this stuff, and then he goes off and he decides, you know what? Every time they try to kill Jesus, he escapes. Every time they try to corner him, he turns the tables. Every time they have a question to try and nail him down, he flips it over and helps them to see that they're seeing it all from the wrong perspective. Man, maybe this is the solution. And Judas goes to his own understanding and makes a deal to get Jesus captured. And we know the story. He throws the money away later, and he's so distraught by what's happened that he now takes it upon himself that he's caused the death of the Messiah. He commits suicide. Like he's so caught up in his own heart in this stuff. But what's interesting to me is none of them understood what was about to come. Jesus said, I can't tell you everything. You cannot fully bear it yet. You can't bear everything I have yet to say, but it's coming. The kingdom's going to be within you. It's going to be around you. Some of you are going to see it before you die. And when he shows up after his resurrection, they're like excited again. And then he says, now you go wait. I don't know about you, but waiting is tough. There's 1,000 voices out there say, well, you're always supposed to be doing. And well, what happens in the waiting is that he renews us. It came out a couple of weeks ago with Jamila sharing her word and Lance sharing his in the same setting. And what's going on? What are we hearing? And we're hearing it's, how do you renew a wineskin? How do you prepare your heart? Only you know your heart. Have a sober awareness of your own self, of your own heart, based on the amount of faith, amount of trust that you have in this. If you're struggling with trusting God in the midst of all this, that's a good sign. I know for me that I need to go get some more saturation. I need to be reworked. What they did with those old wineskins, as you know, is they didn't throw them away. They're too precious. They renewed them. They repurposed them. They put them underwater for a period of time, and they let them rehydrate to get their flexibility back. And then they massaged oil into them. That picture is spending time with him, drinking him in the living water into our souls, into our hearts, to go after all of those things. And as we saturate in that, as long as it takes, like some people even get upset, well, it should only be a certain amount of time, and then you should get back into doing. The temptation is to go back and try to do things you've done it in the past. This is how I used to love. This is how I used to serve. This is how I used to live my life. This is how, but he's inviting us into this new place, into the newness. And he's not showing us what it's going to look like because, well, typically he has never done that. He gave them a glimpse of the promised land. It's a land flowing with milk and honey. There's freedom. It's going to be a place of rest. But if you've read Stephen Hill's PDF, you step into it. It's going to take faith to step into things he has for you uniquely, and they're going to be different, likely from what you've been used to before. And just to get round to the very basics of it is, in transition, let me say it again, your heart, our hearts, is the wineskin. You are it. He's not concerned with institutions. He's not concerned with denominations as much. He does love his people, and if they're attached to something, but he does not love the things of this world. God did not create institutions. He did not create denominations. We did, but he loves us in the midst of that. All of those who've had children or grandchildren know, as much as you would like to direct their lives and to live a life the way you believe they should be, the reality is you actually want them to discover who they are in him, and live from the fullness of who they are, not into a box, not into a franchise model of Christianity or life, or what the world says are these important things. Literally freedom. The most, when I was downtown, I remember having revelatory times with the CEOs and vice presidents and things, and talking about changing the company and how do you shift 6,000 employees to go from this to this? How do you bring change into a worldly setting? And I remember this guy it was one of those moments where I'm sitting in this room with them, and I said, well, what do you believe is the most important thing in the company? You senior leaders, what do you think is the most important thing about the company? Is it the knowledge that it has? Is it the fact that we know more than that company down the road? It comes down to your people. It'll always come down to your greatest asset in anything is going to be the life and the uniqueness of humans. And when they are free from bondage, when they're free from lies, where they're free from, if you can create environments, if that was possible, if you could create an environment for them to thrive, you naturally will have a thriving whatever it's attached to. That's how I used to think in those days. And then God draws me into the ministry world, because the answer isn't dangle carrots and try and tease people into their potential. It only lasts for a little while. 80% of people working downtown in corporate settings, not just in Calgary, around the world, this stat is very well known. After about 8 years, people don't really enjoy their jobs. And they start looking, and they get 20 years experience doing one thing, doing the same things. And then they look forward to retirement, as that's when I'm going to now live this life that I want to live. And God's going, that life can be lived right now in the degree of your heart's capacity to be whole. That's what he's after. That's why the wine isn't just for, quote, Christians or Pharisees, or it's for everyone, for this wine to be poured in as much as their hearts can receive. But what do we do? How does our wineskin get renewed? Us on this screen, or those listening. How does he do that? Well, just recognize, has the old wine been poured out yet? Is the old thinking dead yet? Is it, quote, gone into the grave? Or is there something in your heart, God, I just really want to get it back to doing it that way? There's just something. We love nostalgic things. We love nostalgic music, watching old movies again. We love that having around us, but it's nostalgic. There's a reason it's why we love it, because it wrote into our hearts at that time. There's nothing wrong with how we came to our Christian journey in the churches and the things we were taught and how we grew. But he doesn't live in the past. He lives in the now, and he's preparing us for the new. That takes risk. That's why it says why those who've drank in the old wine don't necessarily want the new, because the old is so secure. And the beautiful thing about God's heart, as we saw the kids in the desert for 40 years, he still loved them. Like he never stops. Doesn't matter how long we go around the desert, if you will, getting renewed. Their shoes never wore out. Jesus was the rock, it says, and poured out water to them. The Father, the Spirit, the cloud that blocked the sun from the heat and protected them at night from the cold. Just, it's incredible that God never leaves us or forsakes us. This is not a have to. It's kind of like we can be like a disciple and not have to put our sense of security in exactly knowing the future, but to actually press in with him. So what's the first thing we do in transition is accepting that God is about change. He is about doing this in us. And if you're afraid of that, that's okay. He knows that. So he'll go to those things that create fear for you. Where has that fear come? Because perfect love displaces, casts out fear. And so I know on this screen, in my notes, I have some of your names actually written down here because I've observed how you're going through this. He was showing me this morning, and I won't call you out, but it's kind of neat. What happens is when we are starting to get to this place, the aim of the process of putting new wine in renewed wineskins is not to figure out, not to describe what the new structure is. You are the wineskin. And as you go, as it changes, and everywhere in the world, it could be very different. If we're living in Redding, California, it would probably look very different, what's going to come out. We've had people from up there come here and they say, well, we're on this process of living new, learning how to love more openly, being less concerned, being more vulnerable with each other, for example. That creates a sensitivity, a risk. What if people, I want to be seen and known, but what if they really know me and really see me? Oh no. And that fear pops up. And he goes after that fear because the wine is not yet flowing. The new wine is coming in. He's preparing the wineskin. But if we still have that old, I can't do that, but I want the new, but I can't. He's going, we're going to go after that piece. Let's get that out of our hearts. And for many of us, for the last 2 years, for sure. I mean, March 12th was the beginning of the pandemic for me, landing in from America and told to quarantine for 2 weeks. And I just went, I knew what this was. I just knew this is going to be great. I mean, I didn't know what it was going to do. I didn't know the outflow in the world. I would not have guessed how many people. I didn't know enough about it to know the impact it would have on a world and reaping what's been sown into the world. But I just knew for myself, this was going to be a unique time. I didn't know how deeply he was going to go. I didn't know how much old wine was still sitting in my heart because I was still doing some things the old ways. Here's something that's kind of, when this process of renewal is starting to happen, and here's how you know it's getting, how oil is coming into, you'll start to have this energy, you'll start to have this excitement. There's a sense of wonderment and awe. I think my wife's going to talk about this next week, but all of a sudden you start seeing things differently. Your eyes of your heart start seeing things. You can see the harsh, hard things. You can have compassion in that, but you're also seeing, you can go into the book of nature type of thing and just get, wow, instead of being so suppressed and so taken out. And as that fresh anointing will be released into you, this excitement of what he's doing in you and through you starts to grow. You start to feel like, man, I can do anything. I can do it. It's an open field. I'm free. Wow. And there's this childlikeness that's ready to kind of step into the new. And you don't know what it is, but it's like my little granddaughter there going, where he's in my heart, in me heart. It's where I grow big. That excitement in her little heart at 2.5 years of age is like, that's where our hearts get to start to react like. And that's hard. Why? Because we've hung on to old thinking in different ways. But you'll know there's an excitement about the future, and what's impossible begins to feel possible. Grace is being released to you, and it's such a great time. And then what happens is he may start to lead some of you, instruct you to do some things that look just plain crazy. This gets really interesting, because this is what drives me a little bit, because I grew up moving around so much in my life, no parenting that was consistent, no structures to get some security in. And so my heart likes to hang on to current structures for myself to a certain way. Other times I'm like, let's go try something new. And it's crazy. All of a sudden he might do something like this. This is the note I wrote from a friend, and he might do something just plain crazy, like moving houses. Barb, you like, when we talked with you about this, we didn't talk about you, but when we were talking with you about this, my apologies, you were like, I just feel you even used the word, it feels crazy to some people. Would even well-meaning Christians would come up to you, go, what are you doing? That you're supposed to have security and you're supposed to do this. And now when I listen to you, what's going on in that move, you're going to new places, you're experiencing new things, you're having conversations with people. I'm sure there's a lot more in there to unpack, but some are being invited to start new companies or let go of old ones. They are being invited into new territory. Some are invited to start a new job, try something different, like he's leading you into new things. I think back, this gets really unique, because, Shantae, basically stepping into the next step. When you're young, often it feels like, well, of course, that's the next thing to do. And sometimes they're motivated, and it's great. We get there, and then sometimes we can go, okay, I've now got it all secure. Tim and Kate, land in BC, and the transitions aren't just flip the switch. There's a process, because it reveals things in our hearts and the people around us. It's incredible. It could be anything, something that you've never done before, and it will be different for every person. God will not franchise a wineskin and say, everybody, this is now, meet with 3.5 people and pray this prayer and have worship that goes this long. Make sure the worship is like that, and do this and this and that and this. And then I'll pour my wine into what you've built. Well, God blesses us regardless, but we may have that mentality. But I am appealing to all of us that this is a unique time in human history. Chronological age has nothing to do with, it's always going to be our hearts. And he can pour into us. For those who had a chance to hang out with Helene King, 83, and you read her little book she was retired, and when she really met, everything now was familiar to her. She'd done all these things in her ministry life, and now she's alone, retired, and she thought she was going crazy the way she told us. And then he shows up in the kindest of ways and starts massaging her heart to receive. Now you have a new life. For those who remember Aunt Olive, I'd love to show her video at some point again, is her when she said to me, Brant, I was married for 45 years and I took care of my sick husband for 2 years, and then he died. But I've been single longer than I've been married on the planet. And I'm thinking, at that point, I've been married 25 years. And I'm thinking, you were married for 45 years and you're, wow. And she said, I remember in the video, she says, this is to the Ethiopian widows that was recorded by Ralph. She says, I thought, well, now what? My life is over. I've now, that life is done. And my friends and my husband's gone. And God says to her, yeah, that life is done. That life is over. But I have something new for you. New friends, new life. And it's not like the old was bad. it's a continual transition and a movement into what he has for us. And I am the hood ornament on a car that very reluctantly steps into the new, very reluctantly along my life. But I just knew there was enough faith. And when I would doubt, he'd say, yeah, I am here. Yeah, but this threatens all of my sense of security or what I think is safe. I know, but I didn't know freedom and joy were going to meet me the further I stepped into that. And I just want to encourage us all that this is what he's doing. He has that new wine. He is looking, he's searching, he knows for those new wineskins. But you need to choose one thing. You have to say yes. And then submit yourself, if you will, to his love. Open your heart. Psalm 110 says this: your people will volunteer in the day of your power. Your people will volunteer in the day of, that is not a verse that a franchise Christianity is supposed to put up on the screen and say, everybody volunteer and do something for Sunday mornings at 2% of our awake hours. It will come out of your life. If you love children, if God put that in your heart to do something you've never done before, or it could happen in so many different ways. And there will be a connection. There will be a oneness that comes. But the point is, when that life flows into us, it will touch on those places of our fears. It will eradicate, and we'll have this energy, this excitement. And guess it's risky and scary. Barb, is it risky and scary to have taken your house and everything like that to do that? We could all think of many examples in our life. And this is the process. This is why he is on the move. And this is a time to not get caught up in this world stuff. This is a time to go, okay, is that old wine? The actual opinions, the judgments. If you're like me and you're honest, you've had lots of judgments come up in your heart from your tree of knowledge, from how you think about life and how you think whatever it is. But to lay those down and just pour that out and go, Father, I've had lots of opinions. I've had lots of thoughts, but what really matters is you. Like, if I was living in Jesus' time, like I said, I probably would have identified. I might have been the guy in the crowd if I hadn't known what God's like. And there's Jesus up there with Pilate and Barabbas. Barabbas is the powerful Jewish, we're going to take down this one world government. We're going to overthrow. We're going to fix things. And I'm not suggesting we shouldn't have it be in those places, but I'm just identifying with me being in the crowd. And Pilate says, which one do you want? Do you want me to release Jesus, this person who loves and has compassion and claims he knows Yahweh, and that you can know him too, and da 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 da, it's all new, you don't have to do, or or Barabbas, who, man, we can put our faith in someone who's going to change our world for us, like literally in front of us. I'm pretty sure if I wasn't a disciple, if I was in the crowd, my heart would have leaned into release Barabbas. You know, that's the immediate solve. If I was a disciple, I've gone through all these roles, and I don't think I would have been John, only John, and we're standing at the cross when all things are dying, when all things are fearful. I might have been Peter and Scott. I might have been, man, you're amazing. You know, I will never die. I'll die for you, Jesus. I'll go anywhere in the world on whatever mission trip you want to do. My life is yours. Until that first teenager comes up and go, are you one of those? You know, are you part of that sect that, you know, they denying him, like, and then you wake up and you go, oh my gosh, so real. Part that I just want to end with this is just simply encourage us to continue to receive, continue to allow him. It doesn't matter how far into the 2 years, how much you've experienced or not experienced, he is right now pouring out his presence, pouring out his wine. But first, he's renewing us. Is the old gone? Check your heart. Any thoughts, any judgments, any things that, do not align with literally what Jesus would be doing. Like, is your heart kind of, and it's okay. You just give it to him. And in these 2 years, many of us have had more time on our hands, or we fill that time with, comforts, false comforts and things. But the reality is spring is coming. This pandemic is getting to the end. It will be over. And like most in human history, they kind of go out with not with a bang. They're not like a gun goes off around the world and everyone says, "Yay, it's done." It's going to go out very carefully based on people's hearts. A lot of people are going to carry fear continually going forth. A lot of people will have, like, we're seeing it right now in our country. Can we just call it done now? I'm not going to move my truck until this is done. It's just because it is done. I'm done. We're so done. And here's all the reasons we're done and what we think about it all. And everybody has a different passion about it. But the reality is, for us who have eyes and ears to hear and see, he's up to something much greater than what we're seeing around us in the world. And for us to be able to walk and to be unoffendable and to be able to go to any person, anywhere, and any time, and let love come out of us with literally the Father speaking through us. I just listened to a short little clip of Bill Johnson saying, the way you change the world is from your knees. The way you change the world and see change in the world is when you are humbled before him and in intercession, as he says, with him, listening to the heart of the Father. He said, I don't want to go try and do any action that I haven't first heard from him and being with him. Because if I'm just doing it out of my own beliefs or whatever. And I can say honestly, our communal connections, whether people living locally in this city or in this nation or around us, we're being brought into his family. And one of the most incredible things about it is it has a label called intercession, but that's what Jesus is doing right now. The head is right now, Jesus is the head of his church. And it says in scripture, he's right beside the Father, interceding on our behalf, meaning all the people in the world. His body is here on the earth. We're his body, Paul tells us. And we get to be his hands and feet. We get to be one with him. And he's way better to trust than any other human. And as we listen to him and have his heart, we're getting the heart of the Father for. And that is that's why this gets exciting. That's why when we sell a house or start a business or do something we've never done before, not just spontaneously, but I have this excitement. It's in here. I step into my promised land by faith, not by, I'm just your servant. Tell me what to do next. He's changing your heart to be like his heart. That's what he's doing with it. It's not rocket science, but gosh, how few people in the world fully understand. That's the point. The reason why he's revealing himself, why Jesus says the whole point is to bring you home to the Father, is so that you can discover who you are as his son and daughter, how uniquely you are made. And as you step into that, the journey of sonship, this adventure, is incredibly, you will have tribulation, whether you sit in your castle and protect yourself or whether you're out on the field. It's always going to be there, whether it's inside or externally to us. But where does sonship lead? It leads into being in the kingdom, being of the kingdom, and living in a place where it just gets, I can't think of anything better. Part of me kind of almost, it feels like hit the reset and send me back into the corporate world, knowing what I now know. But then I realized, guess what? For those who've heard that song called Pioneer, many of us are at the front edge, if you will, in history right now. When I say front edge, the last, 100 years or so, maybe the tipping point in Toronto that happened 28 years ago, 6 million people, around the world got their wineskins completely, if you will, jarred, and the old was just jettisoned out, and life and healing came into the heart so that more wine could pour in. I think this is a reality, and it's a big thing going on right now. So that was me talking a lot. And guaranteed lost some people along the way, and a lot of people posted things. So I'm not sure if I can read all these, but I'm going to stop right now.